You're listening to the Ontos Podcast, where we explore the nature of stories and the pursuit of being and truth. I'm Vaud.
And I'm Maq.
And our sentience depends on you. Now cue the intro music. In the end, I worry that my arrogance shall destroy us all. All right. We're into chapter 8 now.
Mm-hmm.
It's awesome. Vin's on top of a wall, and she jumps off and fails terribly. It's quite interesting there. So Vin makes the jump. We left the last chapter with her steel pushing her way on top of the wall in Lufadel. And she's just kind of balancing herself at the top. She hasn't landed yet. She's freaking out. Kelser's laughing at her. Like, oh, you can balance yourself. It's easier to balance yourself on 3 points, but you can do it on 1. You got this. And something he mentioned, though, which I thought was really interesting, was he says her body has been balancing itself forever. And so even though she's allomantic pushing, her body will still help her naturally balance out, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
It really kind of lends weight to this idea of, like, using the power. It takes skill, but it is also, in a way, like, instinctual or innate, which is kind of cool. But yeah, he helps her get on top of the wall, and he's like, we're going outside. We're going outside of the wall here. And she's like, at night in the mist. And he's like, yep. Yeah. So just jump off and, steel push your way down, push a little bit before you hit the ground so you don't crash hard, and you'll be all good. And bye. And she's like, no, wait. And he's like, no, really, there's like a guard patrol coming. So bye. And he just jumps off. And she jumps off with him. She screws up big time. She pushes herself away. She's about to crash into the ground and die because she's not over her anchor anymore, as they called it. And Kelsier snags her out of the sky because before he had given her a belt with some metal in it, and he catches her out of the sky and puts her down gently. And again, he's just making fun of her.
No, he makes a point. He's like, might as well put you in, death and danger while someone's around.
Yeah, might as well experience it now. But yeah, they go off into the forest outside of the city in the mist, and Kelsier doesn't tell them where they're going. She asks, and he's just like, well, I got a place. We're just going to be going to my place. We're going to go. And Vin just has time to herself, and she starts to think, and she tries to like go through the different things she's seeing in the environment. And really, she kind of says something that I think I was really thinking about at this point in the book too, which is, where the heck does all the ash go? Like, if it's consistently raining ash, would that not just bury everything? And Vin's like, well, I mean, we sweep it into water, so, like, I guess water breaks it down. And so, I mean, I guess that makes sense a little bit. Like, well, not really. I don't know.
I mean, it seems like a majority of this economy is clearing ash away. So,
yeah, well, she's just kind of left to her own thoughts as they're walking through, and she kind of like senses something. She has this feeling. She's like, something's off. And Kelsier's like, oh, you feel that? Oh, yeah, that's probably a mistwraith. What?
Like, what? This thing.
What? So all the legends that like Kelsier has kind of noticed and called the Skull superstitious for, like, apparently they're real. And he's like, yeah, it must be a mistwraith. And she's like, he goes, you want to go see it? And she's like, oh, okay.
Like finding out the paranormal activity demon is real, and it's right around the corner.
Hey, yeah, you want to go see it? Knock knock. Yeah, Kelsier takes her back, and they hide, and this thing is real. The mistwraiths are real. It's described as like a dark mound, and then she turns her tin on, and it's like this big bulbous beast with translucent skin that has the limbs of several different animals, including people, like sprouting out randomly from it, and it's just crawling along. The limbs don't even seem to be functional or anything. And Kelsier explains that, like, oh yeah, they can reproduce and everything, they can duplicate, but what they do is they're like scavengers. They eat whatever they can find, and once they do, they're able to reproduce it. And He's like, yeah. And she's like, well, why hasn't anyone killed these things? Why haven't they cleared them out? And he goes, here's my altruistic view of it, and here's my super pessimistic view of it. Altruistic, they don't hurt people. He goes, he's never heard of a story where they've attacked a person. He says
a healthy, fully done person at least.
yeah, and so he's like they're scavengers. They don't really hurt people, you know. He's like, but she's like, there's people in there. And he goes, yeah, he probably found a body. And in the world we live in, it would make total sense that like they dumped a Scala's body somewhere, or like they just didn't even bother to pick it, and it probably found it. So that, to me, that makes sense. That's his good view of these things. He's like, the less good view is the noblemen have a great use for them, and he says no more, but I'm sure we can all assume that the noblemen love to keep the ska in their huts at night, not even have to worry that they run away because they're so afraid of these things.
Or something. I mean, well, yeah, I'm not sure what he means by that.
But yeah, so after they kind of leave the misting, the mist wraith, they eventually find a what's it called? A carriage. Sorry, a carriage. And at the carriage is waiting a man by the name of Sazed, which Vin immediately recognizes as a terraced steward. That's what she calls him. Sazed is supposedly like a very tall and lengthy man. His like arms are way too, like in Vin's eyes, are way too long for his body. He doesn't have a lot of hair. He's in robes that are just absolutely beautiful. She makes a note of his high voice. And he seems to be Kelsier's servant, or at least someone who works for Kelsier, because he's like, you know, welcome back, Kelsier. Where are we going? And he's like, well, Sazed, we're going to the place. And Sazed's like, all right, we'll get in. I'll take you to the place. And they seem to set off. And we get a little bit more about Kelsier and Marsh's background together, because Vin asks Kelsier if, you know, is Marsh the older one? And he goes, yeah, Marsh is my older brother. And she asked him, like, well, did he beat you a lot? And she's like, no. Like, what do you mean? Did he beat me? No, like, we get in fights, but he's never laid a hand on me. And Vin just doesn't believe him.
He's like, that must be why he hates you so much, because you stopped him from beating you.
Yeah, you stopped him from beating you. And he's like, no, he never wanted to. And Vin just, like, can't wrap it around her head. So it's like, you know, dang, Vin, like, you know, we heard it's bad, but, like, it must be really bad, because Vin thinks abuse is the natural state of things. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of sad. But Kelsier tries to explain that, like, hey, Vin, I need you to trust me. If you can't trust me, like, you can't be a part of the crew. He's like, I'm not trying to push you away or anything, but if you don't trust me, you can't be a part of the crew. And Vin goes, I run it. There's no chance of betrayals, whatever. And Vin says something. You know, she brings up that he was abused. He was betrayed, and that's how he was caught. So what was that all about? And us being in Kelsier's head at this point, we get to see firsthand how much this shakes him. And he, in order to try to, as a last-ditch effort to try to see what Vin's going to do, he takes all the money he got from Cayman, you know, from essentially what Vin pulled in for Cayman. He takes all that money and just tosses it at her and says, like, I'm not keeping you here for any reason. I'm not going to hide information from you. I'm not going to try to stop you. And she goes, well, I can't feed myself. And he goes, well, here's this money. You know, if you want to be here, you need to be here, and you have to want to, because that's how the things around here run. We trust each other, and if you're going to be here, you need to trust me.
And this whole time she's thinking, like, the only reason I'm going to hang out here is because he needs to teach me about the two metals that he didn't teach me about. And he even says, I'll teach you that, and you can leave if you want to. Yeah,
literally, when we get to where we're going, I will teach you those two, and you can just walk away if you want. And so ultimately, she decides to stay, and she claims to Kelsier that the reason she wants to stay is because she's just curious how his plan's going to turn out. Because she points out it's insane. And she openly this time, like, it isn't like, oh, that's insane, this little... She, like, straight up says, you know you're going to lose, you know you're going to die, you know the Lord Ruler is going to beat all of you. Why are you doing it? And he's like, we don't know anything. And that was, like, his whole argument. We don't know anything. We can try. And so she's like, I must stay because I want to figure out how this is going to go. Well, the last little bit of advice he gives her before they arrive at Lord Renew's manor is that we learn again that you need to burn away all the metals when you're done with burning metals for the day. And he says, if you don't, you can get really sick doing that. And he also points out and actually says out loud, oh, by the way, if the metals that you burn are also really, really off, like have almost no elementic properties, they're just messed up in some sort of way. Oh, and by the way, if you take any sort of metals, or you burn metals that are off in any sort of way that don't have elementic properties, it will kill you. And she's like, oh, well, that's good to know. Well, they arrive at Lord Renew's place, and Vin is awestruck by how pretty everything is. She describes how they've scrubbed the place clean of ash. He has like marble white, like flooring, which seems pretty counterintuitive when there's basically soot everywhere, but like it's completely clean. They keep it completely clean, and they do a fantastic job. And she says that this is beautiful, but she sees Kelsier's like off about things, and she's like, why are you off about things? Are you sad because it's so much waste that's built off the back of Ska's? And Kelsier's like, really, it's just not beautiful. And she's like, what do you mean? And he goes, everything's brown. What do you mean? The plants are supposed to be brown. No, they're not. They're supposed to be green. And that's something that we talked about in our epigraph episode.
And Vin is like, what a weirdo. You're thinking plants are going to be green.
Why would plants be green?
That doesn't make any sense. He's like, so weird.
But yeah, I think we talked about it in the prologue. I think we talked about it in our epigraphs episode, but we discussed this idea of like, it's sometimes hard to remember that like, oh man, everything's brown.
All the plants are brown.
Yeah, there's no color to the plants. Or if there is, I want to say in chapter 5 it mentioned that there was a little bit of color to plants, but it's so incredibly rare. It's like a nobleman's treat to have something that isn't just brown. And so they arrive. Lord Renew comes out, and Vin's impressed because she says, when this guy looks at me, I know he's fake, and it does not feel like he's faking as a nobleman. Like, I feel just as uncomfortable around him as I do the real deal. And so we get to see firsthand that whoever this is, they are doing an incredible job at impersonating Renew. An incredible job. Well, they take him inside, they feed them, Renew and Kelsier excuse themselves to talk about things, and we get our first little bit of interaction between Saced and Vin, where we learn, again, that Saced is what is known as a terraceman steward. And apparently they're sought after by the noblemen as being like the perfect servants. They are a master class. I might be wrong in this, so I apologize if I am, but like English butlers, right? It's like seen as an honorable profession. And so like this kind of is what it seems like. It's like these servants, it's seen as a big deal and something honorable for a lower class person to be able to aspire to.
It's like a high dollar thing.
Yeah, to aspire to these standards.
These are these are like educated, well known, like high end people.
Yeah, and Sazed, Vin wants to talk to Sazed. He gets kind of annoyed that he's standing somewhat at attention behind her, and she tries to get him to talk to her and say, "Get in front of me," and he jokes with her by standing next to her, and he just kind of messes with her. And she tries to, in a roundabout way, go, I don't know how much Sazed knows, but I need to know what he's doing here. So she tries to ask in a roundabout way why he's here. And he just straight up comes out with it. He goes, are you asking why a terraceman is a part of a rebellion to overthrow the final empire? And she's like, oh, God.
Literally like two sentences before that, they were like, yeah, they're the perfect servants that are completely loyal to the empire. And he's like, yeah, no, not me.
Yeah, and another thing he notices here is that we talked about before is like with religious beliefs and everything. He straight up points out, he goes, if this religious belief that in the Lord Ruler isn't enough for you, I have plenty more I can introduce you to if you want. And he just overall is a really interesting person. He's supposed to be this master servant that, these people like the terraceman stewards are supposed to be these perfect servants, yet here he is, perfect in skill, kind of lacking or different and I don't want to say faith, but just an ideology here on what that should be. Well, Kelsier and Renew come back out, they're done talking. Renew talks about how, hey, Vin's not going to be a good heir for me. You know, he's not going to pretend to be a good heir for me. It's not going to work because she, you know, there's too many reasons why, like, she's a girl. That's the biggest thing. I can't have a girl as an heir when I have plenty of male cousins. I can't, you know, oh, and if she's my heir and she's unmarried, it's going to pull way too much attention to her because everyone's going to want to try to get her hand and try to get a hold of the estates and stuff. So it's like, that's just a terrible idea. Let's just make her a scion of mine. She's a backwater country rural scion, which is why she's not as educated, and I'm doing this. She's here as a favor. And everyone's like, agreed, great idea. And they retire for the night. Kelsier apologizes to Vin and tells her that he's sorry that he didn't include her in on the conversations and that he promises it has nothing to do with the job directly or her. It was a personal matter. Otherwise, he would have included her because she's a part of the crew and her input matters. And she's kind of thrown off by that. We end this chapter and part 1 with, I think, something that's very interesting to hear. Sazed being this master class in professionalism and this servant, Vin asks him, is Kelsier a good man? And he says, one of the best I've ever known. And that's the end of part 1.
And just one little thing, because you did a great summary there, but there's one big thing that we missed about allomancy, is that metals that are inside your body cannot be pulled. So like Vin gets worried about her earring and was like, oh, don't worry, they can't sense it, they can't pull it, and that's why they can't pull metal out of your stomach.
Yep, I did miss that, but yeah, that is a big point. Otherwise, they'd just be yanking metal
right out of you. So yeah, I mean, I know we keep saying like lots of big things. It's almost like there's no such thing as a small thing, but Terracemen. So now we remember from the epigraph episodes, or the epigraph episode rather, that Terracemen gets mentioned. So this is our first time running into a Terraceman.
Yeah, the Terrace philosophers,
right?
Philosophies,
and I think they mentioned some like Terrace Pac-Man and things like that. So people from Terrace, I guess we can assume. So Sazed is one of those, and you can already tell like he's different. He's very different from anyone we've kind of met or run into. I don't think we've run into like very many nobles.
A big thing too is in the epigraphs it mentions that the Terrace prophecies are what are deeming this person to be like the hero, the savior of everyone. So yeah.
And Sazed says like, you know, my thing is I'm here because of belief. And if you hold one belief or you don't hold another belief, then you should probably, you know, figure out why, you know, if you don't like what you're holding on to, you should find something else.
Yeah, and I want to say he says a good belief is something that will keep you warm and wrap you in protection, while a bad belief will suffocate you.
Yeah. And so he said something about like, I think he questioned Ven about like, what do you believe about the final empire, or what do you believe about the Lord Ruler? And she kind of takes a kind of sophomoric, you know, look at everything, but it's just because Sazed's got her where he wants her. But going off of that, outside of that, we run into mist wraiths, which I always imagined as like, I always imagined them as like somewhat glowing blue clear slime that carries a bunch of body parts.
Yeah.
And when I say body parts, I don't mean people parts. I mean like everything. So bones and all that stuff. And they're so terrifying if you think about it. Like you just have this ooze that's going around with
gelatinous cube for you D&D nerds.
That's essentially kind of what I was going through, you know, except it's just moving around and apparently have really good sense of smell and taste, but no sense of hearing. And you can imagine that would be super scary.
Oh yeah.
And it sounds like, you know, they can mimic most things. So if they got a body of someone, then it could look like, you know, really, really creepy. It
makes sense where these, where the little bit of lore that we've learned about the legends, where it's just like, oh, yeah, that person's a mist wraith because they'll steal the way you look, they'll steal your soul. It makes sense when you see that they literally mimic the body parts they consume.
And it's interesting that they're able to do this because I remember Vin was talking about like, oh, are they intelligent? And Kelsey's like, well, no, not really, because
Yeah, not at all.
they basically just copy things, but like they can't really like do anything with it. They just pick things up and try to like go through whatever forms they have.
Yeah, like none of the limbs they have, the body parts they have, none of those that they copied are functioning in any way, shape, or form. So,
the other thing that we kind of get reiterated on is, Vin is super uncomfortable with clean things.
yep.
She comes in and all she can talk about is how clean everything is because there's no soot, there's no ash, there's no dirt. So, kind of a consequence of where she's been, but also just kind of more of an idea of like what the world is outside of these mansions and things like that. You imagine like the outside of these buildings. I think they said they have like aspen trees, which those are the ones with like the trunks with the white, things on them. It's an aspen because of the way it is. Those are those trees, right? Maybe I'm missing my memes. But even those are just like set out for like the nobles. So we got a really dirty, nasty world where green plants are super weird. And it's like, why would he want? It'd be like if someone walked in and be like, these leaves are supposed to be blue, like bright blue. And you'd be like, what a weirdo.
Yeah. Another thing that I find interesting, talking about Saced again a bit, is there's a quote that it's not going to be perfect here that I remembered was Kelsier mentions that Saced no longer has a master when Renew mentions like, oh, Saced, you can go back to serving Kelsier. And Kelsier's like, no, Saced doesn't have a master anymore. And Saced himself responds with, a terrace man without a master is like a soldier without a weapon. I'll be happy again to serve you, Kelsier.
Yeah, so I mean, this culture is definitely different. Definitely unique from anything that we've run into so far. The only noble person I think we've actually really, really, bumped elbows with now is Renew.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got the Obligators, the Steel Inquisitors, the Ska, and now these Terrace men. And if Says is any kind of an indication, these are going to be these are at least a unique, people. I'm going to be interested to see how they piece into the whole politics of this whole plan. Hey guys, it's Matt. Thanks for listening to the Altos podcast. You'll start seeing regularly scheduled episodes starting November 14, 2022. If you'd like to follow us, please consider subscribing. We're a small project, so please support us with likes and comments because that's what the algorithms crave. If you're listening to the YouTube channel, please hit the notification bell. And if you really want to give us a boost, consider supporting us on Patreon so we can give Vaud a better mic.